Stanford University.
Hello. I'm not sure whether at noon you say good morning or good afternoon, so I'll just say hello. I'm Michelle Marinkovich, the Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education and the Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. And I want to welcome you to today's presentation in our award-winning Teachers on Teaching series. We are so pleased that English professor Jennifer Summit, one of the brightest stars in the Stanford firmament, will talk to us today on teaching for learning. Jennifer represents the new breed of scholars at Stanford who are not only outstanding in their field, but are asking big and critical questions about the content, the methods, and the direction of education today. She is asking these questions here on campus as a member of the Study of Undergraduate Education at Stanford Committee, which has actually just issued its report, and nationally in pieces that she has written about the humanities, and as part of a grant funded by the Teagle Foundation that is looking at the important question today of what is a reader. After receiving her bachelor's in English with highest honors from Vassar College in 1987, and then completing her PhD in English literature from Johns Hopkins University in 1995, Jennifer that same year came to Stanford as an assistant professor, focusing on the medieval and early modern period, and especially building bridges between those two. 6 years later, which is the fast track in humanities, she was tenured and an associate professor, and soon after that, in 2008, was promoted to full professor. Nor had she been on campus long when the awards and fellowships recognizing her research and teaching accomplishments began. She won the H&S Dean's Award for Distinguished Teaching in 1998, a Stanford Humanities Fellowship in same year, a Dean's Fellowship in the Humanities in 1999, an NEH Fellowship in 2002, an ACLS Burkhardt Fellowship in 2004, a Society for Medieval Feminist Scholarship First Book Award in 2005, the Isabel McCaffrey Award from the International Spencer Society, also in 2005, a President's Fund for Innovation in the Humanities Award in 2007, that same year an award also from the Hoagland Fund for Innovations in Undergraduate Teaching, and another Hoagland Award in 2010. The Eleanor Loring Rich University Fellowship in 2008, and then there was 2009 when she won a Teagle Foundation Award, the Roland H. Bainton Book Prize, and the John Ben Snow Book Prize, all in that 1 year. And lest you think she has given up on awards, last year she won the Collaborative Project Award from the Society for the Study of Early Modern Women. At the same time as doing the brilliant work that has brought this recognition, Jennifer has been unusually generous in her service to the university and her discipline. And here I'll only mention a couple of things in the interest of time. She chaired her department from 2008 to 2011, and is, I think, the only person I've heard who actually said chairing the department was fun. So, and as I mentioned, she has served on the SUSE main committee and also chaired its subcommittee on writing and oral communication. As you will soon see, Jennifer is unusually thoughtful intellectually, asking the big questions and providing gentle but steady guidance in the search for the most robust approaches. But she is also unusually thoughtful in her work with colleagues and students. To be in her orbit, to go back, I hope, consistently to our firmament metaphor, is to be challenged to reach the highest standards, but with warm and effective support. Stanford is very fortunate to have her here on campus, a model of the synergizing collaboration among teaching, research, and service. And we are very fortunate to have her here to share her thoughts on teaching for learning. Professor Jennifer Summit.
Thank you, Michelle. That was an extraordinary introduction, and I want to say, sort of by way of returning the compliment, that Michelle and I first met in my first year at Stanford 16 years ago when I was hired in the English department, and the department chair told me then the best piece of advice that I could have gotten, which was, he said, go to Center for Teaching and Learning, because you never stop learning how to be a good teacher. And in fact, that very year, I remember introducing myself to Michelle to go through my first set of teaching evaluations, which were mystifying to me. So she helped sort of decode and demystify them. So I am aware of how much I owe to Center for Teaching and Learning, how much we all do. Well, to bring us down to earth after, to follow Michelle's wonderful introduction, I was telling a friend of mine this morning at Escondido School about the talk that I was giving, and today I said it was called Teaching for Learning, and I described it, and she said, sounds like this talk should have a subtitle, and the subtitle should be, Don't Do What I Did. So to, I guess, drive the point home that we never stop learning and growing as teachers. This is I'm going to be telling you about a teaching experience that I've had that I continue to learn from and hope to deliver the message that we can always improve our teaching. So I called this talk Teaching for Learning because I wanted to focus on the difference that it makes if we start out our classes by focusing on what we want our students to learn, as opposed to what we want to teach. Now, if you ask most of us what we want our students to learn, we'll say we want them to learn the material. And I think the conventional syllabus is organized around the material. In my case, in the humanities, I'll organize my syllabus chronologically or around themes or around literary movements, but the logic of the course really follows my sense of the intellectual coherence of the discipline. But even if it were possible to cover a discipline or a subfield in 10 weeks, that isn't the most important thing that we're teaching. And I think most of us know that. And if you press us a little bit more about what we're teaching, we'll probably say that we're teaching not so much material as habits of mind. That what we want our students to learn from us is ways of thinking. So in my case, I'm a literary historian. I want my students to come away from my classes not just knowing something about literary history, although I hope that they do, but even more importantly, gaining the skill of thinking in a literary historical way. That is, thinking about texts in ways that connect them to a bigger picture and make them coherent across a sort of broad range of time. So it makes a difference to the way that we organize our material if we think about what our goals are. In my experience, is relatively easy to teach material. It's harder to teach habits of mind. It's even harder to teach students to learn. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. Now, in what follows, I'm going to illustrate my own efforts and learning process as a teacher with examples from a course that I'm currently teaching. First, I'm going to tell you about some difficulties that I encountered the first time I rolled this course out. Then I'm going to run through how I came to understand and learn from these difficulties. And then I'm going to tell you about how I made changes to the class and I think resolved some of the difficulties, learned some new ones, but in the meantime learned a lot about teaching for learning. So I'm a literary historian. This is a talk that has a story arc. I promise you it has a happy ending, but it also has some conflicts along the way, which is what makes things interesting. So the course I'm going to be telling you about is part of a new core sequence that the English department has developed as part of its new undergraduate curriculum. The course is a 3-quarter team-taught course. There are 8 of us teaching total, and in what follows I'm going to be telling you just about the part that I am responsible for, but it should go without saying that developing and learning from this course was very much a group effort. And as we say in our acknowledgments, everything good that came out of this experience I share with my colleagues in the English department, and I take responsibility for everything else. So this course is called Literary History 1, 2, 3. I teach in 1. We say that it isn't a survey, but it does have some survey-like qualities. So it's organized chronologically. It covers a vast amount of material. It brings together students of all levels, entering freshmen, seniors, students with a lot of experience with literature, students who have no experience at all. It also brings students together, let's say, involuntarily, because it's a requirement. And those of you who are tittering know that the unique dynamic that introduces into a classroom, teaching a required course. So the first time we taught this course, we designed the syllabus together. We identified a set of themes that we would trace throughout the year. We selected materials that were relevant to those themes. And then we organized our lectures in ways that would relate to the themes and then stress connections across the text from one to the other. Let me say, this was a beautiful syllabus. And I'm just geeky enough about this sort of thing to believe that a syllabus can be a work of art. It was a work of art. I was responsible for the medieval and early Renaissance periods. Typically, these are the periods that students have difficulty with because the language is hard. They won't have encountered the materials before, and students who are used to reading modern literature will sort of feel like they're coming up against a brick wall. So I chose the text very carefully to fit into the overall course themes, the overall story that we were telling, that is about the development of English literature, religion and community, English as a nation, the development of sort of global perspectives. It was all there. So since this was our first year teaching the class, we did a lot of assessment. At midterm, we surveyed the students thoroughly, and we found that the students were struggling to the point of despair. They complained about the amount of reading. They thought the grading on the papers was harsh and unfair, and they didn't know why they had to read early literature. So with the help of Marriott Denman at Center for Teaching and Learning, we decoded the response that we got from the students, and she helped us realize that the amount of reading that we were giving the students was actually quite mild. But they were finding it very difficult to read without help. So when they complained about amount, we were able to see that they were really complaining about difficulty. Our grading was actually extremely fair, but they didn't understand what our standards were. The early literature was essential to the class. but they didn't know why we had chosen it. So in other words, we were having a failure of learning that pointed back to a failure of communication. Our students didn't understand the aims and goals of the class, and then how the assignments and the materials related to those aims and goals. The syllabus may have been a work of art, and I believe that it was, but it didn't explain itself. It was not transparent to the students. So we needed to do more work to make it clear to the students what they were supposed to be doing in this class. Ultimately, we didn't want them just to learn the material. We were able to confirm with ourselves. We wanted them to learn how to learn. We wanted to show them that by encountering this material, they would also gain not only knowledge, but essential skills. We wanted them to trust us to take them where we wanted them to go. Well, we identified these problems. With Mariette's help, we performed radical surgery on the syllabus. I'm happy to say that we were able to salvage the course. We performed even more radical surgery the next time we taught it the next year. And indeed, the story has a happy ending. We had, I think, a great course this year. Before I tell you what we did and how we saved this class, I want to take you through some of the self-analysis that we did, some of the reading and learning that we undertook in order to help us understand what we needed to do to this class to save it. So what we did helped us transform this class from a teaching class to a learning class, from a class that was about the sort of beautiful array of the materials that was really about what we wanted our students to get from it. Well, it turns out that there is actually a lot of research out there on student learning. And so we were able to turn to this and learn from it extremely useful and tangible things. As I was preparing this talk, I came across a great article in the Chronicle of Higher Education. I've given you a reference on your handout. This was January 17th of this year. An article by James M. Lange called Metacognition and Student Learning. This was in the section, if you are followers of and fans, that's called Do Your Job Better. This is a great article in it. So he defines metacognition as the ability to assess our own skills, knowledge, or learning. And he opens with an example not from the university classroom, but from American Idol, which he calls America's favorite spectacle of poor metacognition. He says, what makes it so cringeworthy, especially the first couple of episodes, is a student's inability to judge their own skill and ability. So he says, similarly, students have a mistaken sense of confidence sometimes in the depth of their own learning, which is why they complain to us about their grades, and they're shocked when they've studied so hard, but they still fail the exam. What's happened is that they've mistaken hard work or natural ability, which they may have and they may have done, with learning, which they haven't done. So our job is to teach them what learning is in our disciplines, to give them the tools with which to measure their own learning, and ultimately to show them how to gauge their own needs and their own progress. There's a new book that really sets this out in ways that I found very useful. This is How Learning Works by Susan Ambrose and a team of her colleagues. And it has, I'm going to be taking you through some tangible suggestions that I got from this book, from one chapter in particular that's about how to create engaged students. And I've given you a summary on your handout, but I'll also be going through it on the PowerPoint. Well, the bad news that we learn from Susan Ambrose is that research on student learning confirms that students tend to overestimate their abilities. Unfortunately, this is more true of weaker students, the ones we really have to work hardest to reach. They spend an inadequate time preparing their work. This is true for those of us in disciplines where students write papers. Alas, they will sometimes write them distressingly close to the deadline. But apparently it's also true for disciplines like math or problem sets that they do not plan ahead. It turns out that novices spend less time planning than experts do. So that students who think, oh, I can do this, so I don't have to plan. Well, actually, students who are experts in the discipline will know, as will graduate students, how much time it takes to plan an assignment. It's the beginners who don't, because they've overestimated their ability. They also have a tendency to confuse ability with learning. This is something that we can learn from our colleague Carol Dweck in psychology, whose research shows that students who believe that intelligence is fixed they work less hard on their assignments, and they don't learn from their own experiences because they have a conception that what goes on in the classroom is sort of testing their natural ability, and there's nothing you can do to change that anyway. They also, this is distressing but maybe not surprising, they tend to ignore assignments, even when we spell them out with great care. So just putting an assignment on the syllabus doesn't mean that they've necessarily understood it or understood what we want. They also tend to use strategies that worked for them in high school rather than learning new strategies. And then they are distressed when they don't get the same grades that they got in high school. Now, this is not true of all of our students, but it's true of the students we should be focusing on. That is, the students who are having trouble, the students who are maybe the okay or slightly less than okay students, but who could be fantastic students if we were able to help them to a better frame of learning. Okay, so that's the bad news, but the good news is that they can learn. They can learn how to learn, and we can teach them how to learn. We can teach them skills for learning that will help them not only in our classes, but also in the rest of their classes. So in developing these skills, we can give them the ability to, number one, assess the task at hand realistically, to evaluate their own level of preparation and achievement, to plan their approach to assignments, to monitor their progress, to reflect on their success, or to adjust their approach when they're not achieving success. So how do we do this? Well, we do this by clarifying what we expect from them in terms of both knowledge and skills. By sharing what we don't want from them, we can give them concrete examples of writing that doesn't work. By creating frequent opportunities for evaluation and feedback, that is low stakes, outside of the high stakes exam or the paper. Just small ungraded quizzes or sort of opportunities for them to gauge and check in on how much they're learning or not. We can make our criteria for evaluating their work explicit, and we can also take students through the process of learning by breaking that process down into its component parts. There's been some really interesting research on teachers in my discipline, in literature, about how they put together their lectures and what they think lectures are doing. And if you ask many professors of literature how their students learn from lectures, they will say, I would have said, they learn because we model to them. We model what it is to put together an argument about a literary work. Well, it turns out that students do not learn from modeling at all. And if you actually interrogate them after a lecture and ask them, what have you learned? They'll tell you little factoids or little interesting anecdotes that were the most marginal to our point at all. It is truly distressing. But they do not learn from modeling just because we have set out an elegant argument for them. So we need to break that argument down and show them step by step what we're doing, so that they can develop, so we can demonstrate for them the same level of self-consciousness that we want them to develop in our classes. Okay, so back to the Ailing literary history class. What did we do? How did we apply these principles so that this story could have a happy ending? Well, we started by setting out our goal, first of all, by asking ourselves what were our major goals for the class, and then setting them out on the syllabus. So these, and I've given you them here on the slide and also on your handout. These expectations included what they should learn in terms of knowledge and understanding. Now, knowledge and understanding are the traditional goals of an academic course, but we also wanted to emphasize synthesis as well, that we didn't want them just to understand concepts, but we wanted them to understand how concepts would come together. So you'll notice that when we ask them, we tell them that they should gain knowledge and understanding, but it's also of how texts fit together into a broader literary history. We also wanted them to achieve awareness and appreciation. For us, these are the foundations of the English major. And in fact, these goals came out of a set of discussions that the English department had about what the English major should accomplish for its students. So we wanted them to have awareness of literary movements, terms, forms, but also we wanted, again, synthesis. We wanted them to gain an understanding of how these fit together into a bigger picture. And then finally, our goals included tangible, concrete skills in reading and writing. And these came out of the challenges that we observed the first time we were teaching this class. This time, we put them on the syllabus. We made our goals in reading and writing explicit. We walked them through these goals on the first day of class, but then we continuously returned to them as we went through the class so that we would reinforce them. So next, we revised the syllabus to match these goals. Since the medieval material was particularly difficult for them, and I was responsible for the medieval section, I jettisoned about half of the texts that I had taught them the first time around and substituted new texts that would engage them and hook them. This is a strategy that I learned in part from research that Curtis Wong at Microsoft Labs has developed. He does work on online learning architecture, which is very interesting. And he's developed a model for learning that he calls ECR, which stands for engagement, context, reference. And he says that for him, the basic architecture of learning is first to hook your learners, second, to show them a big picture, and then third, to offer a new application that allows them to synthesize their learning. Well, I had something like this in mind when I recreated the medieval portion of the syllabus. So the first time I taught the class, I started with Chaucer's Man of Law's Tale. Does anyone know this text? Yeah, so there might be a reason that you don't. It's a wonderful text. It's a wonderful text, and it's loved by graduate students because it's interesting, it's meaty, it's full of interesting issues. It related to all of the course themes that we had in mind, a sort of global English, travel, sort of religion, identity. It's a challenging text, and it's a text that usually I had wonderful experience teaching it with graduate students. In retrospect, You know, I will not say that a text by Chaucer, whom I love, is boring, but I will say that it's maybe less engaging than some of the other ones were. So this time around, I substituted the general prologue and the Knight's Tale. How many of you have read those? Yes. And there's probably a reason for that as well, because your teachers anticipated your needs better than this one did. So this had the benefit of first hooking them because these were crowd pleasers, but then also foregrounding the goal of teaching them close reading from the beginning. So the general prologue is an excellent text for teaching students to read slowly. And we stretched out the opening part of the syllabus so that we could work through the general prologue practically word by word, as if through a microscope. I gave them a low-stakes, ungraded reading and writing exercise that allowed them to focus on close reading some of the opening of the Canterbury Tales. And they came away remarking to us that they were used to reading their assignments, even in literature classes, by skimming them, and that this exercise had taught them to slow down, which was something that we hoped that they would get from the whole class. But by foregrounding this and telling them this is what we were teaching them from the beginning, it sort of formed the foundation for the rest of the class. We also redesigned the course assignments, so we included these ungraded, low-stakes assignments. We included the first assignment is what we called Autobiography of a Reader. We wanted them to reflect on their own history as a reader, what brought them to become the reader they were, because we wanted to set the terms for the class and to get them to reflect on themselves as readers, not just as reading as a transparent process, but actually reading as something that you build through a lifetime of experience. We worked very closely with the Hume Writing Center before and after we gave our analytic writing assignments. They set up individual workshops with the class. They helped with revisions, and they did one-on-one tutoring with the students, which is something, a real forte of the Hume Writing Center. We also gave our students writing assignments after every lecture. After every lecture, we would stop and hand out a sheet and ask them, okay, what was the most important thing you learned? What was the most interesting thing you learned? And what do you want to hear more about? This was a very useful way for us to just keep an eye on, number one, what they were learning. If what was most important turned out to be some sort of throwaway anecdote, we were maybe in trouble. But likewise, if what was most interesting was not also what was most important, then we maybe also should be thinking about our presentation. So this was a very useful way, to stimulate the students' metacognition, but then also to give us feedback about how our lectures were working on the students. We also drew up a grading rubric, and this was keyed to the specific learning goals on the syllabus. And I'm sorry for all of the text on here. I've also given you an extract on your handout, which only takes you down to the C range, but as you can see, it goes lower. We didn't have to apply those lower ones too much, I'm happy to say. But in doing this, we were able to show them how our learning goals were worked out in the form of our specific expectations for them. So our learning goals, you notice, will reflect our interest in knowledge, that is awareness and comprehension, as well as skills, what a successful paper looks like. We also shared with them examples of successful papers with the names removed so that they could see that, number one, that success is within their grasp, but also that there's a wide range of papers that can achieve success in this kind of assignment. And that was a very useful exercise. We weren't quite sure about that, actually. I think we consulted with CTL before we shared those examples, because we didn't want them to feel like there was a script that they should follow, but we came away feeling that if we gave them several examples, then that would actually be empowering to them, and indeed it was. That was a good thing to do. Well, as a result, we had much happier students. The student evaluations rose dramatically, I'm happy to say, but also when we again continued the same in-depth assessment of our students as we started the first time, we learned that they were also feeling much more confident in their abilities and in what they were taking away from the class. So this was very good. We had happier faculty and TAs. We felt that we were all on the same page. With a team-taught course, this is particularly challenging because it can feel like you're all going off in a million different directions. But here we shared a set of reference points that we could refer back to, and that was comforting as well as really satisfying. And then when students came to us with questions, we could all point them to the same page. Now, we're still not done with the class. In the process of teaching it the second time, we learned a lot. It's improved a lot. It's not done. There are some things that we would like to do next year, and we are actively planning those. Next year, we would like to focus specifically on student writing. We, despite all of our hard work, I'll say that our hard work with the Hume Writing Center brought them up to a certain level. They were definitely much improved over the year before. But we still also found that they were missing some key aspects of what we were looking for in an analytic essay. So in preparation for next year, rather than just assigning an analytic essay, we would like to break down the analytic essay into its component parts, see if we could come up with exercises that can help them build confidence in each of those parts. So this is how you write a thesis. This is how you ask a productive question of a literary text. This is the difference between summary and analysis. This is how you, which is a big issue for a lot of students in the humanities. This is how you find evidence for a specific thesis. So I think this is something that we would like to work with our colleagues in Hume Writing Center and PWR as we're planning for next year to think about how can our writing assignments more effectively address our students' writing needs. So we would also, since it's a multi-term class, we'd like to build in portfolios. Students don't save their work. We're always distressed to find this out. But if we can create portfolios where they can gather their work from quarter to quarter, that will allow us to keep an eye on their progress, but also even more important for them to keep an eye on their progress, because I think it's extremely satisfying for them to get a sense of their own development that way. So all of this is to say that this is a work in progress and illustrates my opening point that we are always developing as teachers, but I also hope that one of the takeaway points is that you can make big improvements with actually quite small differences, or with quite small changes. So let me close by just running through a couple of major takeaways that I learned from this experience and that I hope could be useful to you. Teaching for learning is something that you can introduce to any course at any level. I found it to be a much more satisfying class and also a more intellectually meaty class when we were able to foreground the learning process as a major focus of the course. The payoff for the students was that they had greater clarity about the course goals. I hope that it will also help them become better learners in their other classes. It also, to me, felt like a more respectful way to teach, rather than the banking model that we've all heard about, where the students are expected to sit back and sort of absorb the information that we're giving them. Instead, this is telling them how we're enlisting them as collaborators in the process of learning. So it made us feel less like entertainers and more like guides in an important and challenging process. The payoff for us was that by asking ourselves what were the major goals of this class, what did we want our students to learn from this class, we were grappling with the big questions of our discipline. Because we were asking ourselves what English was about, not just as a collection of content, but as a specific form of knowledge production. And that, after all, is what disciplines are. The question of what does it mean to read, or what is a good reader, has been at the center of literary theory for the entire 20th century, from the new criticism to deconstruction. These are questions that we were working out on the ground with our students, but they're also questions that the discipline historically has grappled with itself. I think also by focusing on what our students should be learning and making that our focus, we were also addressing a problem that faces a lot of humanities classes, and maybe we'll recognize this. Especially on a campus like Stanford, students can sometimes have the misconception that the humanities have no standards. They think that we just make things up because they sound interesting, and that we grade, but grading is purely subjective, right? How many of us have heard that? And it's distressing because we know that we have standards, we know that we have a methodology, but we don't always communicate those to students. And so they come away not understanding what the core of the discipline is. So by clarifying what we're teaching and what they should be learning, we're also showing them the places where the discipline really does have a strong and powerful core. So, if you want to introduce teaching for learning, I suggest that you start by drawing up learning goals. Include different levels of learning, knowledge, yes, but also awareness and skills. And then see if your assignments line up with those goals, both the materials that you include on the syllabus, but also the formal assignments, the papers, the exams, the exercises. Are they really coherently leading the students to the goals that you've identified? If they aren't, can you find more creative ways to meet those goals? And here, I think our colleagues in the Hume Writing Center, Center for Teaching and Learning, are incredible allies, and we should be making use of them. As I said, every course is a work in progress. In my case, it meant revising and revising again, but it also meant that making the students partners in the class also made me a learner and helped me reconnect with the discipline in ways that were extremely transformative. And I hope you have a good experience with this too. Now, I wanted to end to give us time for questions, and I see that we have 16 minutes for that, and I'm glad because I know that there are some master teachers in this room. So with that, let me maybe open up the table and invite you to ask any questions or offer any experiences of your own on the topic. Thank you. Yes, Jonathan.
Okay, I was thinking I would be the second question, so this is a bit unformulated. But this transformation that you described, I mean, it just sounds like it was a win-win-win-win-win-win situation. And what's interesting, I think, is that it's not only that, I mean, you've taken this class that you said, as you said, I was struck by the line, you had happy teachers and happy TAs. That it takes this image of the required class as this kind of drudgery that's the lowest level of intellectual work we do as teachers, that's the furthest away from engagement with the crucial questions of our discipline and so on. And you've talked about it as this transformative intellectual moment for you, and also that this tremendous experience that was transformative for you actually didn't involve changes that were that big. I wondered how, and I think here we're all on board to hear this message, but I wondered if you've run into colleagues who were less receptive to that, and how you've talked to other people in the field who want to teach the way they were taught, or they want to think about their teaching and not about student learning. Or have you come across come across people that this is a hard sell?
So, yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think I'll quote my colleague Sue McConnell here, that one of who put you on the spot. But one of the things that Sue said on the faculty senate floor was that nobody wants to be a bad teacher, and actually, I found this to be true, certainly here at Stanford, that there is such a strong and vibrant culture of teaching, but also that we take our teaching home with us, that it matters to us that we have a successful class. And part of that means constantly growing as teachers and not teaching the same class year after year. So I'll say that that I haven't actually encountered the difficulties that, we encounter these stereotypes about higher education all the time now, that, faculty are more interested in their research than in their teaching. I guess, but I've never met anyone like that. And it would be hard for me to imagine, how do you teach a class like that? Oh, I'm teaching, but I'm really thinking about my research. Because in the end, what makes you a good teacher is that you're actively grappling with the very same questions that your students are. I will say that where there is a challenge is more around the ethos of teaching. That is, sort of, what are we trying to produce when we're teaching? Are we trying to produce students who are miniature graduate students? Or are we trying to produce students whom we can meet at the level where they are and then bring them up to the next level? I think that the coverage model, which we as a discipline are moving away from, but it's still a very, I told you about the beauty of the syllabus, that I think that it's a very compelling way to organize our material around coverage. And I think that we still, in a lot of ways, hold on to the idea that it's possible to organize our material on a coverage model. That is, you start in September, you end somewhere at the beginning of December, and somehow you have covered it, right? Well, I think the reason to give up that model is not just that it's impossible, but also, although it is, it just is, but that that's not how students learn, and that the way that they will learn our material is by engaging with it, and we need to activate their engagement. So I think that on the basic question of inspiring faculty to teach for student learning, I don't know that I have met the faculty member who said, I'm not interested in student learning. I think where the differences come in are around the varying degrees of investment in the coverage model. And there are, I say this as somebody who teaches in the early periods, the medieval and Renaissance, which, in a lot of ways are the soonest to be jettisoned from a comprehensive coverage model, right? But I think that we have other and better cases to make for our fields and for our disciplines than simply you need to plug it in because it produces part of a comprehensive coverage. Yeah. Sue.
Jennifer, that was just such a beautiful story, and the way that you wove together general concepts that I think apply to all of us with your specific experiences to illustrate them was just so effective and really powerful. I'm interested actually in the conceptualization that what you went through was a win-win experience, because I suspect that there were some pretty important compromises. There were some things that were lost in order to make the time and the space to engage the students more fully and to enable them to be, enable yourselves to be more explicit about teaching and learning. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what those compromises were and how you as a faculty, have you sort of reallocated them into other parts of the curriculum, or have you just accepted that there are some losses?
Yeah, that's a really, really good and important question. So I would say the specific losses that we encountered the second time around with the syllabus. Substituting the knight's tale for the man of law's tale, yeah, I'm not sure it's a great loss, although I urge you to read the Man of Law's tale sometime, because it actually is. It's an interesting tale, if not an entirely lovable one. So there were I would count that as a local loss. Doing the Knight's Tale rather than the Man of Law's tale meant that there were some themes that we couldn't talk about, like, pilgrimage. But it opened up other themes that actually were more engaging to the students, like love, which turned out to be a real win for us. Lots of literature is about love. So that was great. But yes, we did have to cut out some of the authors who were on our syllabus. Some of those cuts were very painful to me because they were Marjorie Kemp, a great medieval mystic, quasi-mad woman whom I'm dedicated to personally, had to go. She just had to go in order to open up the space for the intensive close reading that we realized we had to get them to do at the very beginning. I'm very sorry about that. But I'm also hoping that students having taken this class will then take my course on medieval women mystics, for example, and will encounter Marjorie in her full glory. So I think that we restructured the curriculum. This is part of the backstory of this talk. We restructured the entire curriculum so that the historical rather than having the historical requirements distributed across the electives, we concentrated them in the core, and so we opened up the electives so that they were truly elective. I think that our next challenge is to recreate those electives so that they can pull the students from the core into sort of more advanced levels of learning with those smaller seminars. And this is actually the ideal place to encounter Marjorie Kemp, not in a lecture class. So I will admit that there were some pangs, but they weren't long-lasting.
Jennifer, that was a great talk. Thank you so much. I want to say that I took something away really valuable that I've been struggling with, and that's the distinction between knowledge that's being gained and skills that are being gained. And I'm currently working on a syllabus for a brand new class I'm teaching in the spring. It's anthropology, urban studies, that's my area, and I often have students ask me questions I think so bizarre, when they have a paper due, they'll say, well, does grammar count, or, this is an anthropology class, do I actually have to write well, as if it's not really, as if it's not part of the learning process, and we go to the writing center and we talk about the fact that, well, yes, indeed, you need to be able to communicate your thoughts, but you gave me the idea, why not put it on the syllabus to say, not only are you gaining anthropological knowledge, this is a course about the history of cities in developing countries. Okay, you're going to gain this knowledge, but you also need to develop these skills in this class. That was really useful. I don't know why I had never thought to put it on the syllabus, because then, in fact, they would be disappointed when they were graded down for not communicating their ideas well, the actual writing structure in the paper or whatnot. So thank you for that. I found that to be really useful. We should all help them to see that it's foundational.
Fantastic.
The skills building is foundational.
I think also this is an opportunity too. I'm so glad that you asked about writing. This is an opportunity to really explain to them what what the expectations of good writing in your discipline are, because I think when they ask us about grammar, they think that there's sort of one kind of good writing, or they think of writing as like the frosting on the cake that you sort of slap on, right? And so we need to be able to show them that different disciplines have different expectations. So for example, here I've taken us back to the writing skills. And we do explain to them that we want them to learn to write as practitioners in the discipline of literary studies, which involves developing a cogent argument, supporting it with carefully chosen evidence, and then demonstrating the argument's importance within a broader range of disciplinary knowledge. I think different disciplines will have different criteria for what counts as clear and effective communication in that discipline. And this is our chance to really articulate what those are. And it's very interesting to do that, because then I think it opens up to us the question of, are our assignments asking them to produce the kind of work that will satisfy our own expectations? And that's a very interesting question. So I think that it's the beginning of a really interesting journey for your students, and also maybe for you too. Yeah, good. Wow. Let's see. Robin.
It leads also to the idea that if your ideas are picked up and generalized, that when we look at syllabi in 5 years, the syllabus itself, broadly defined, the way we communicate with students, may look different, just as your syllabus underwent a transition. What kinds of generalizable things would you like to see us doing in our syllabi, in our conversations with students?
What kind? Can I ask you to rephrase that? Because what sort of generalizable things?
The learning goals, articulating the learning goals.
Yes.
Stopping and thinking about what does it mean to write. These are things that many of our syllabi don't do, and they may not exist in conversations with students.
Yes.
So are there other things, I mean, are there things that you could imagine communicating with your students, the next generation of this syllabus?
That's great. Yeah. So thank you for clarifying, because I wanted to be sure that I was following this important question. We've been focusing on the syllabus and what should be on the syllabus. I am interested and perplexed by the fact that students don't actually read syllabi. And so I think that having said that my old syllabus was a work of art, which is true, it was also maybe an artifact from the past, right? Because I don't think that they do read syllabi. They don't know how to read them in the way that we do, right? But also, they don't... we put something on the syllabus, and then the students ask us, and we say, it was on the syllabus. Well, they don't know because they don't read the syllabi, right? So I guess I'm wondering, are there more effective ways to structure a class and to communicate our goals other than maybe on top of the syllabus? I mean, the online syllabus is a challenge to which I don't think we've entirely risen, because we have a separate section for, if you take a print syllabus and then you transfer it onto an online version, we have the section they can click on, which could have the course goals, but I'm not sure that they are necessarily doing that. I think they're going to the calendar and seeing what's due, possibly the next day. So are there better and other ways that we could, conceive what a syllabus could look like? I mean, here, actually, this is a question I would love to give to Curtis Wong, whom I cited earlier, people who are really thinking about learning architecture. A lot of talk about what happens within the individual class, like the lecture, is the lecture dead, is the lecture not dead? But what about the syllabus as the organizing principle of the course? What other and better ways could we envision that could, share the vision that we hope our syllabus will capture, maybe in an iterable way? Because in a way that can be continuously reinforced, but then also continuously checked. I would like to see us giving our students evaluations that are a little bit less about our talents as performers and more about learning goals, so that if we could give students an evaluation that was really a self-evaluation about how much have you learned in the following areas, and customize those to the goals of the class. That would be something I would love to see. But as far as the syllabus goes, that's a really interesting question. I think that's one that we still have to catch up with. Michelle.
Just a word on syllabi. One of the more interesting things I saw was a class where a professor made the first homework assignment that students actually had to read the syllabus and answer some questions about their role in the course in light of some of the assignments in the syllabus.
I love
And it was, but if I can also say something, Sue, about coverage. One thing that's often forgotten in the whole issue of coverage is the attrition of knowledge. In other words, the attrition of what was covered in students' minds very, very rapidly. The amount of knowledge that is lost within just a couple of months of the end of a class is very, very high. And so I think one good discipline for a teacher is just to ask to themselves, since I know students will forget most of this within a few months, what do I really care about that they'll remember? What skills or knowledge, and how can I make sure that that core survives? Because I still remember vividly years ago when, for various reasons, a final could not be given on time in a class at Stanford. So the students were asked if they would take the final a month later. And the reaction of the students was, that's totally unfair. We'll have forgotten everything. And this was a philosophy course. So what do students think they're learning if they think a month later they will have forgotten it all? And that, I think, is also a good question for us to ask ourselves.
I think this term, attrition of knowledge, is so poignant.
What if you had one of your last essay questions in the final develop a syllabus for the course? Summarize not the assignments, but the scope, the threads, the knowledge transformation.
Beautiful.
And maybe the learning goals.
Beautiful.
Another way of metacognition.
Beautiful.
I think we probably will have to. Thank you for asking the final question. So we thank you again so much. This was wonderful.
Oh.
Professor Suffolk.
Thank you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.